Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Institute for Justice never sleeps, seemingly. Every time I turn around, they're filing a new lawsuit on behalf of somebody who's been wronged. Here's another one. Several people sent this to me. CJ Ciaramello wrote this for Reason.com. Lawsuit. Prosecutors filed bogus charges against Detroit man in retaliation for challenging the seizure of his car. Involves a bunch of topics we'd like to talk about here. A Detroit man has filed a federal civil rights lawsuit alleging county prosecutors illegally retaliated against him after he challenged the seizure of his car under asset forfeiture laws right here in Michigan. The lawsuit, filed Thursday on behalf of the man by the Institute for Justice, claims that Wayne County prosecutors twice filed baseless criminal charges against him after he joined a class action lawsuit in an attempt to get his seized car back, violating his First and 14th Amendment rights. The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office is not well respected in the legal community. I've got some stories I could tell you about the prosecutor, but we'll save those for another day. Wayne County's meritless criminal prosecutions against Robert were an unconstitutional effort to punish him for challenging the government in court and a desperate attempt to defend the county's rapacious vehicle forfeiture scheme by any means necessary, says the lawsuit. Back in 2019, police seized the man's Camaro along with more than $2,000 in cash, and they stopped him, and they said it was because they suspected that he had stolen a skid steer from Home Depot. Now, I'm not sure if a skid steer will fit inside a Camaro or not, but you'd think if they searched the car and didn't find one, you'd wonder about the connection between the Camaro and the skid steer from Home Depot. But more than 6 months went by, and the man was not arrested or charged with a crime. But the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office did not even file a notice of intent to forfeit his car, so he wasn't able to officially challenge the seizure. They simply took it, okay? So they seized his car and $2,000 in cash and didn't file anything. So he's got no money, he's got no car, and he's got no charges. Seems like a weird limbo to be in. So he then joined the class action lawsuit filed by the Institute for Justice in 2020, challenging Wayne County's aggressive asset forfeiture program. He was one of 3 named plaintiffs who claimed that the county forces owners through a months-long onerous process to challenge a seizure violating their 4th, 8th, and 14th Amendment rights. The day after the class action suit was announced, the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office instructed a state police task force to release the man's car and return his cash. So he's going to get his car back and his cash back. 2 weeks later, they filed felony charges against him for receiving and concealing stolen property. Then asked the judge overseeing the class action lawsuit to suspend the class action while the criminal case against this man proceeded. In February of 2021, after more than a year of delays because of the pandemic, the judge in the criminal case dismissed the charges for lack of evidence. Turns out you need evidence, even in Wayne County. Less than a month later, the WCPO refiled the charges against the man, and in January of last year, the case ended because the judge dismissed the case for lack of evidence. See, it turns out you need evidence, even in Wayne County. I think I've heard that before. The Institute for Justice argues the felony charges were clear retaliatory actions intended to sandbag the man's civil suit against the county. The government cannot use bogus criminal charges to attempt to silence its critics. Institute for Justice attorney Kirby Thomas West said in a press release, "At the core of the First Amendment is the idea that Americans are free to criticize their government without fear of intimidation or retaliation. And yet, that's precisely what Wayne County prosecutors have done in their no-holds-barred attempt to derail this man's lawsuit. In more than 30 years of work, the Institute for Justice has not seen such a brazenly unconstitutional litigation tactic. We're confident that with the second lawsuit, the courts will not only end the retaliation, but also hold those responsible to account." So, man's car and money are taken. No charges are filed, but he cannot get his stuff back because he didn't file the proper paperwork. So he joins a class action to get his stuff back. They give him his stuff back, but then they prosecute him for something which they have no evidence for, and so the case gets thrown out. They then refile the same charges, again with no evidence, and the charges get thrown out. Why did they file those charges those 2 times? I mean, what other reason could there be? Under civil asset forfeiture laws, police can seize property suspected of being connected to criminal activity, even if the owner has not been charged or convicted of a crime. Law enforcement groups say that asset forfeiture allows police to disrupt organized crime like drug trafficking by targeting the illicit proceeds. The question is, what did the Camaro and the $2,000 in cash have to do with a stolen skid steer from Home Depot? However, civil liberties groups across the political spectrum contend that the practice lacks due process for owners, and it flips the presumption of innocence on its head because you've got to prove you're innocent as opposed to them proving you're guilty. Owners bear the cost of going to court and the burden of proof to show that they were not involved in a crime. And to hire an attorney to get your $2,000 back, guess what? It's going to cost you more than $2,000. And they know that. The Institute for Justice is not the first to allege that Wayne County prosecutors and police abuse civil forfeiture and make it nearly impossible for owners to get their cars back. In 2018, another class action was filed when one man waited more than 3 years for a court hearing to challenge the seizure of his car. So they seized his car, and 3 years later, they go, okay, we'll have a hearing on this now. That same year, a woman filed a civil rights lawsuit after Wayne County Sheriff's deputies seized her 2015 Kia Soul because they said that she possessed $10 worth of marijuana. Wayne County seized more than 2,600 vehicles in a 2-year period and raked in more than $1.2 million in asset forfeiture revenues, according to public records obtained by the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, which is a Michigan think tank. Of those seizures, 473 were not accompanied by a criminal conviction, and in 438 of those cases, no one was even charged with a crime. In 10 cases, the cars were seized under suspicion, even though the records say police didn't find any drugs. So they can suspect that you're dealing with drugs, even though there's no drugs to be found. They can just suspect that. Meanwhile, the man's suit seeks $1 in damages. So he's not trying to get rich off this. They're trying to prove a point. They've taken my car and tried to throw me in jail, but I'm still standing, he said. I'm not going to take the county's threats sitting down. This isn't about money or payback. This is about making sure the county can't do this to anyone else. The Institute for Justice's class action lawsuit challenging Wayne County's asset forfeiture program is currently on appeal at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit. The Wayne County Prosecutor's Office declined to comment, citing the pending litigation. So, like I said, I got stories about Wayne County. One of these days I'll tell them. Wayne County prosecutors love to be on camera. When it's good news, makes them look good. But when it comes to defending practices like this, no comment. So, again, remember that at the heart of this case is they seized his Camaro. At the time, by the way, the Camaro was 29 years old. It was an older car. It's not a brand new car. Camaro probably wasn't a horribly expensive vehicle in the sense that, look at him, he's driving that fancy schmancy Camaro. No, it's probably the guy's daily driver, okay? And he had $2,000 in cash on him. They take the car and they take the cash and they go, yeah, because we suspect you of stealing a skid steer from Home Depot. And then they don't give it back to him until he files the lawsuit. But then they just start prosecuting him. And like I said, both times the prosecutions were dismissed due to a lack of evidence by the judges who are overseeing these things. And it makes you wonder, and I understand that there is a Latin saying, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which is a fallacy, meaning that just because one thing happens and another thing happens, you can't say, well, obviously this caused this. Sometimes causes do precede their results, but not all things are caused by what immediately happened the day before. So, can we prove for certainty, just by what we know right now, that they prosecuted the guy twice, retaliatory, because of his lawsuit? Can we prove that right now? Well, based on just what we know from the story, it is going to come down to some circumstantial evidence, and the timing does look suspicious. Because while one thing doesn't always cause the next thing to happen, you can look at the timing of something. You can. And so you would have to ask yourself, if it wasn't retaliatory, why did they do that? How often do they file charges against somebody where they have no evidence? I mean, I know it happens. It's Wayne County. But how, and by the way, Wayne County is the county that encompasses Detroit. How often do they do it again? Where they file charges against somebody with no evidence. And it gets tossed and they refile the same charges with the same no evidence. How often does that happen? And so you start to look at that and go, okay, it does look fishy. It looks weird. What's going on there? So I'll love to see what happens with this one. And again, I'm going to mention the Institute for Justice. They do great work. And every time I talk about them, I've got to tell you, they survive entirely off of the goodwill of people who respect what they do. So if you haven't yet, please visit them. I'll put the link in the description below. You can go visit their website and see what they do. Meet the people they represent and read about the causes they represent. Not just people in the legal system, people who have problems with their businesses and their local municipalities, all kinds of stuff. But it's cases that most people, if it happened to them, couldn't afford to pursue them. So the Institute steps in and handles these cases on their behalf just because of the good it does our society and the good it does our legal system. Because if they make good case law here, it helps all of us. I'm rooting for this guy, not just because I think he was wronged, but deep down, I'm also rooting for him because if he wins, it'll help me. It'll help you. So the Institute for Justice helps him. They help me. They help you. So just take a look at the work they do. And if you're so inclined, flip them a couple bucks because that's how they get by. But they're a great organization. Like I said, I don't know when they find time to sleep because they're always showing up with more stories like this. And by the way, these are not simple cases. These are not simple cases. These are extremely complex cases that often wind up going up on appeal. Like I said, they're right now in front of the Sixth Circuit on appeal. And appellate briefs are anything but brief. And so to get that kind of work done does take time, expertise, and unfortunately money. So there you go. But it's a great story and a great cause from Reason.com. CJ Ciaramella wrote the story. Lawsuit says prosecutors filed bogus charges against Detroit man in retaliation because he challenged the seizure of his car. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. I've never faked a sarcasm.